If you were to sum up PMC in 3 words,
That's a good one.
Really f***ing great. Well, I'm sort of known as a bit of a geek, so anything technological I'm very drawn to. And I've also always been fascinated with binaural processing, both the microphone technique and then also headphone processing. So, you know, the sound effects record that you could put your headphones on and you got a haircut and they were around the back of your head, that was amazing to me. So the idea of Atmos music actually having what can be a speaker-based setup, so you can be in a room and be surrounded by something in like the great 70s quad way, but more speakers and above you, but also that has a headphone component, and obviously it's still evolving and ever changing, but that's exciting because every other format like 5.1 seemed great for some people, and most people couldn't even think about how they would ever experience it. And the idea that, at least how I was introduced to the Atmos music side of things, was it was always meant to be a consumer format. And while the headphone playback it's obviously meant to be a speaker format, the headphone playback exists, but also so many consumer grade playback systems that incorporate it. So whether it's a soundbar, or I've got a little setup with a Sonos soundbar and 2 speakers behind me and a subwoofer, and even that is a really great experience for the playback of it. So that really drew me to it. And then just from doing what I do for as long as I do, I know lots of people. Maurice has helped me out with speakers at events for, it's got to be close to 15 years now. And when I was thinking about setting up my own mix room, that was just the obvious choice, and talking to Dolby about it, and then obviously everyone here at PMC has been amazing, both with support and getting the system spec'd and how it was going to work, and then actually getting it set up. And so now I've got a 914 system with MB3 XBDs in the front, and then wafer 2s around the sides and overhead, and it's in a room in my house that used to be a pigeon coop, which is perfect. So vaulted ceiling, but you know, a small room, but it works really, really well. And the thing that has been most incredible to me was I'd been working on older tannoy speakers for 30 years, SRM 10Bs. They're, you know, the wood grain things, and there's kind of the holy grail of that era of speakers with an old crown amp. And I've tried for years and years to find other speakers I could work with, because at this point I've got 4 pairs of those tannoys kind of spread out around the globe, so I can go anywhere and get a pair of them there, and so I could work. And I never found anything that made sense to me listening. When I listened to the tannoys, I could hear the mix and I could work on it. Everything else, no matter how good it sounded, was just really fun to listen to, but I didn't feel like I could work. We set up the MB3s, and even before we tuned the room for Atmos, and I just set them up for stereo, the idea was, the way they were split up, I could put my tannoys in between the left and center and the right and center, and then have those as a separate set of speakers, and I never took them out of the machine room. I never set them up. There was no point. Atmos in stereo, especially when you're talking about Atmos music, where most of the time there is an existing stereo mix, whether it was created years ago or whether it's been created the day before you started your Atmos mix, and even if it's just created by me the day before I start the Atmos mix. So they are absolutely related. They have to be related, because as of now, one of the things a lot of the streaming services want is to not have multiple versions of records on their site. So when you go listen to whatever new record has come out, if you happen to be listening on equipment that can give you Atmos, you get the Atmos mix. And if you're listening where you can only get the stereo, you get the stereo. But they want to take care of deciding what you hear, as opposed to going to the service and saying, I want to hear the Atmos mix, I want to hear the stereo mix. So that forces you to honor the stereo mix in a really deep, meaningful way. And what's interesting about it is when you start doing it, you really think just sonics. And there is stuff about just the fact that you have a center speaker, and phantom center sounds completely different from a center speaker, and that's something you have to learn, and like what will survive being in a single speaker in front of you. But it's different when you're in a room with a center speaker as opposed to a phantom center. And then when you go into the binaural processing, they react completely differently to pinpoint single source in front of you or dual source that is supposed to be meeting at your head in a way that is physically impossible. When you can move around a room, that phase cancellation is changing constantly. And when you've got headphones on with some of the binaural rendering techniques, that doesn't change at all. It's like you've got these speakers bolted to your head. So it's a really interesting thing sonically to figure out how you're going to use center channel and how you're going to take advantage of phantom center as opposed to true center, and then multiply that by, you've got a phantom center between every two speakers, but then you've got phantom spots in the room that are all phantom. They're, in terms of the actual speaker playback, you might be playing back on a system that's got two speakers, or with an Echo Studio, one speaker that's throwing multiple, tweeters around the room to try and simulate a much larger space. And so to think about the playback, how it's going to translate to fewer speakers or to headphones, but still recreate the idea of the stereo mix. And so where I was going with this is you've got this very technical side of it where you need to understand how the phantom processing works and really get inside of how the binaural processing works, because there's the anechoic component, which is supposed to be the sound wave traveling from the speaker directly to your head. Then there's the early reflection component. Then there is the reverb component. And then there is the distance component, which with the Dolby render, you have choices as to how far away this source is supposed to sound. And every one of those changes the sound in a totally different way, but it does them all at the same time. And what I found was I'd started off by just adhering 100% to the sonics of the stereo mix. And then I started to realize that nobody would care about that except me and my engineer friends. And the idea is, what does it feel like to listen to the stereo mix? And if you're doing a heavy rock track, like I did the single that's just come out for the new Shinedown record, that record has tons of information coming at you out of two speakers in an amazing way. And it feels incredible. When that record is loud, it is a barrage in the best way possible, and in a way that's very hard to recreate as you start to have headroom and split things up. And so my first pass at the song was very much just spreading it across the front wall and some ambiences in the back. And then I thought, well, but that's not fun. Like, what's the point? I want there to be a point to listening to the Atmos mix, but at the same time recreate the feel of it. And then to take that barrage and make it start to spread throughout the room, that became the trick. So it was recreating the feel of the stereo mix without worrying about the sonics, because the only person who was going to care about the sonics was the guy approving the Atmos mix, who had done the stereo mix. So once he was happy, nobody else cares. Nobody cares if the EQ on the kick drum is slightly different or that guitar isn't exactly right. If it feels right, it is right. And that's been the real challenge, but also the joy of figuring out how to make the Atmos music mixes work. The PMCs, I love listening to anything on them, but they still have the ability for me to work. I don't get distracted by anything. So it's this amazing combination of almost surgical precision to the way it is recreating the waveform that's been sent to them. But they're also super, super fun. And the way I always felt about the tannoys was I could hear my speakers, and that was the thing. With the PMCs, it's like the mix is sitting about 6 inches in front of the speakers. And I don't know how to describe it other than that, but it's almost like the speakers don't exist. They are just building this wall of sound that is localized at the speakers. And that's not just in Atmos, that's when I'm working in stereo as well. I grew up a prog kid, so the idea of doing the King Crimson catalog is being done by someone really, really good at it, so I got no problem with that. The Yes catalog, however, as far as I know, has not been touched. And the idea of doing the Yes album, Close to the Edge and Fragile in Atmos, it's insane, but I would want Eddie Offord to get off his boat and come do it. Like, that's, those records to me always felt spatial's the wrong word, but enveloping. And the way they would take a song and pan it all the way to the left and have a second song come in playing alongside it on the right. I mean, that only happens once, but they did it and it worked. And they always had this great sense of space within the arrangements, and Rick Wakeman's keyboard arrangements and Jeff Downes as well. But so that catalog would be amazing. I think the first time I heard big PMCs, Maurice brought a pair of them to a presentation I was giving that Naris sponsored in LA. And it was part of like this day-long sort of, it was almost like Naris had put on their own little TEDx conference. And I did a talk about lossy audio encoding and why I didn't like it. Because this is back when MP3 encoders still kind of sucked. And so we set up a listening room, and Maurice brought a pair, I assume it's the MB2s back then. And I had 6 or 7 albums in every single digital format you could have, including the Norah Jones, which was in 192 32-bit, all the way down to the AAC that was the official release from the label that was on YouTube with their low-res album art video, and then vinyl. And Maurice brought a pair of speakers down, and I think that was the first day I got to really sit in front of them for a day, and was just, I mean, I know I immediately asked him how much they were. Because it's like, how can this happen? So, 12, 15 years later, it finally happened. But then, I mean, you guys have been so supportive, because I've had PMCs at events, I've done mixing seminars and all kinds of stuff. And it's great. There's nothing better than hearing your stuff come out of a pair of these in a room with, 100, 150 people, because they can drive the room the way a PA can, but it still sounds like the best studio experience you've ever had. Every time I listen to speakers, it's always a matter of, okay, I like that, but that sounds flappy, or there's something where I feel like I hear the speaker itself. There's something about the speaker that I'm hearing. And this goes back to what I said before about the tannoys. I always felt I could hear the speakers. But if you look at those things with low end, the woofers are going crazy and you can hear them bottom out and they get tired. You have to know when you have to recone them. And like, you really are listening to the mechanical speaker, which is what's great about them. And the PMCs, I have absolutely no idea how they make the sound they do. They just sit there, they never look like they're doing anything, and they don't sound like they're doing anything. It sounds like somehow the mix is apparating 6 inches in front of them. So there is something about them where I have absolutely no idea what the speaker is doing. I just know that what it sounds like is exactly what I want to hear, and I trust it completely in a way that I don't when you are sort of physically hearing the speaker itself. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's exactly how my brain thinks about them. The thing that I always loved about the tannoys being concentric and how flat they were was that you didn't hear the crossover point. You didn't hear the drivers individually, but you still heard the drivers. Whereas with these, I hear nothing. I don't hear the box, I don't hear the drivers, I don't hear the crossover, nothing. And this is, going from something, I've replaced the caps and the crossovers on my tannoys. There are like 9 components inside that box, and I'm using a Crown amp that's got like 12 components in it. So it's as pure, if you want to be pure, an analog signal path as you're ever going to get. And obviously, with the active versions of the MB3s, like, there's plenty going on. There's sample rate conversion, there's digital processing, there's analog stuff going on. I'm imagining there's quite a bit of acoustic processing within the cabinet, and you hear none of it. Absolutely none of it. It's like magic. Those are my 3 words. It's like magic.